And this is a very different type of shot. This is a very fast flow shot. The Allongé came up because about 12, 14 years ago, I owned a cafe in Montreal. And in Montreal, they like to pull this thing called Allongé, which is a very fast flowing large espresso. It's like a 5-ounce or 150 mil espresso in Montreal. And so we were the first cafe in Montreal to set up a second grinder just for the Allongé. We ground coarser, and we ended up getting effectively like a 22 to 23% extraction with these Allongé shots using a traditional espresso machine, an E61 machine, and they were like fruit bombs. They were very hard to control in terms of preventing channeling, but when they were good, they were amazing, and we blew away a lot of coffee industry professionals who came in and were shocked that they could enjoy a 5 or 6 ounce espresso. That's my spiel about Allongé. So I'm going to pass it on to you now, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
So the light roasts is that they're less soluble. So we know that, and less soluble means that they don't give up their material to water. That's the definition, right? So there's kind of two ways to solve that. You can either have coffee touch water longer, or you can have more water pass through the coffee. Either way, you deal with the lower solubility of the light roast. Okay, the blooming shot deals with this problem by having a longer water contact time. So it takes one approach, and still makes an espresso. By that I mean it's still under pressure. You still get crema. It still looks like something that you know. The Allongé approach takes the opposite, which is instead of having a lot of water contact time, it has a lot of water. So that's how we're dealing with light roasts. Now, what we're doing with light, Allongé is my favorite technique for light and ultralight that normally are incredibly acidic. So what the Allongé is doing is it's still a 9-bar espresso. So it's still extracting under the kind of pressures we're used to, but with a much higher flow rate, which is then dealing with that solubility. So a normal espresso is going to be somewhere between a half mil per second, if you want that thick Italian thing, to, let's say, 1.5, 2 mils per second. That's the Italian world. And then for light roast, we're typically in the 1.5 to 3 mils per second. And that's if you're trying to get an espresso that looks like a normal espresso that you're used to, something like 40 to 50 milliliters in the cup. The Allongé is going to end up with a lot more in the cup because we're putting a lot of water through. Now, the reason this shot is super interesting is dial in with a traditional machine, but you can do it. So I'm just going to give a recipe. If you don't have a decent espresso machine and you want to do this, here's how you do it. You're aiming for a 5-to-1 ratio in a 30-second time. You might even go to 60 seconds, to 6-to-1. So weigh out your beans. Let's say you're doing 18 grams. Multiply by 5, and hit that in your 30 seconds time. Now, the challenge is that your machine's not going to show you the real pressure. So the decent espresso machine shows you the pressure. And if you do this at 3 or 4 bar, it tastes terrible. What you're going to get is actually an espresso. It's going to have crema because it is under pressure. But you will find it to be incredibly fruity, because this approach is going to get more water flow through your beans than any other way of making espresso. It's super hard to dial in on a traditional machine. You can do it, and Scott alluded to consistency problems he had. But when you do, you will find that this is the secret technique to unlocking those beans that when you open them up, they smell amazing, and they always taste terrible. So these are the 3 espressos I'm making: traditional, blooming for a pause, or high water flow Allongé. And for me, this is the biggest thing about the espresso machine is there were these 2 recipes out there in the universe that solved real coffee problems. And yep. Thank you, Scott.
Oh, thank you. It's been awesome. I can never go back to making espresso without the feedback of the graphs. And I love the idea that, like, when I have something like a light roast Kenya that I would normally be wary of pulling as an espresso, I'm excited to pull it as an Allongé. And it does solve one.